Hello, my name is Oren J. Sofer, and a warm welcome to all of you in South Korea. It's a real honor to be here with you at this mindfulness conference, and I'm really looking forward to the time today and to sharing with you a little bit about mindfulness and mindfulness in education. So I thought I would begin by just sharing a little bit about myself and how it is that I come to be speaking with you here today. And then we can spend some time talking about mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Where does it come from? What are the benefits of mindfulness? Why is it relevant to teaching and working with kids and children? And then how do we bring mindfulness into our work, into our day, and into our teaching? So I started practicing mindfulness when I was about 19 years old. I was doing a degree at Columbia University in New York City in comparative religion. And I had the privilege and the good fortune of being able to travel to India and spend several months there living in a Buddhist monastery and studying mindfulness in the culture and the tradition that it grew out of in South Asia. From there, I continued practicing and studying and learning about Buddhism in general and specifically about mindfulness practice. I had a history of working with kids and children in my life in outdoor education, summer camps, youth job training. And so at a certain point, it made a lot of sense to begin sharing mindfulness with kids. So I worked for a number of years here in California in the local schools, elementary, middle, and high schools, teaching mindfulness to kids in classrooms. I've written a couple of books about teaching mindfulness with children, and I'm really happy to be here with you today to share this very powerful and valuable practice, both for ourselves as individuals and as educators, and for the kids, children, and adolescents in our lives. So let's get started. I want to talk first a little bit about mindfulness, where it comes from, what does this word even mean, and how we come to be here together today talking about mindfulness in education. Then we'll talk a little bit about how mindfulness works and its benefits and how to bring it into our teaching. One of the first things I was told when I started practicing mindfulness by one of my teachers, a man by the name of Anagarika Munindraji, an Indian man from outside of Calcutta. He said very simply, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. This is the invitation, or one of the invitations of mindfulness. It's a tool to understand ourselves, our lives, and our relationship to others in the world more clearly. If we want to understand anything, if we want to learn about something, we need to be able to observe it, to spend time with it, to come into relationship with it. And so what mindfulness does, one of the things it does, is it helps us to have a stable and clear enough attention to be able to observe the very functioning of our own mind and body. It's like having a mirror that we can look into, and that mirror helps us to see and understand ourselves more clearly. So let's talk about what is mindfulness. How do we define or understand it? And I'm sure for some of you this will be review. Perhaps you've been studying and practicing mindfulness for years. You might be certified as a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher or other forms of mindfulness. For others, this might be fairly new to you. So there are many ways to understand or define mindfulness. One of the broadest definitions that I like, which is based upon an original definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who founded mindfulness-based stress reduction. Mindfulness is the process of paying attention to what's happening right now in our own experience in a curious and open way. I'll say that again. Mindfulness is the process of paying attention to what's happening right now in our own experience in a curious and open way. So as we consider that definition, there are two parts to it. One part is awareness, We're paying attention to what's happening right now in our own experience. But paying attention on its own is not enough to be mindful. We can be paying attention to something and still be overwhelmed, confused, flooded, reacting. So mindfulness is a particular kind of paying attention. So on the one hand, there's a sense of awareness. On the other hand, there's balance in the mind. We have some perspective on what we are paying attention to. And this is the part of the definition that I refer to as paying attention in a way that is curious and open. So it's a particular kind of paying attention. It helps us to understand what's happening because we're not getting lost or caught in the particulars or the feelings associated with what's happening. So mindfulness brings us into contact with our experience directly. We're not cutting ourselves off or disengaging. We're very intimate with what it is to be human, but we're not losing ourselves in the experience. We're able to stay balanced, clear, and have perspective on it. Another way of understanding or defining mindfulness is through its benefits, what it actually does for us or gives us. So in this way of understanding mindfulness, we can refer to mindfulness as a form of mental training. It's training, exercise for our mind. It's a form of mental training that does a few things for us. It increases our capacity for focus. It improves resilience to stress, helps us stay regulated and balanced. And it enhances well-being and self-understanding. So I'll say those three benefits again. It increases focus, it improves resilience to stress in regulation, and it enhances well-being and self-understanding. So how does mindfulness do this? And that's a tall order to have all of those benefits. So we now understand today some of the ways that mindfulness functions is based on a certain property of the brain and our nervous system, and that is the property of neuroplasticity. Many of you have likely heard of neuroplasticity. This was pioneered by a man named Donald Hebb, sometimes referred to as Hebbsian neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to alter its shape and its function through repeated experience. One of the most famous quotes from Donald Hebb is, "Neurons that fire together wire together." So the more you do something or think something, the easier it becomes to do that. One of the ways I like to explain this property of our brains, neuroplasticity, is it's like walking through a field or a meadow. So picture a meadow out in nature, open grass, clear, pristine. Now, if you come to that meadow and you walk through it once, it's not going to leave much of a mark or a trail. But now imagine that you walk through that meadow back and forth on the same path 100 times, 1,000 times. What's going to happen? Well, after walking across the grass so many times, you're going to wear away a path, a track. There's going to be a groove through the meadow. And now anytime someone comes to that meadow, they're going to see that path, and it's much easier to go down that path than to create a new one. So this is one way of understanding how neuroplasticity works in our brains. Every single thought, every emotion, every physical action sends a little current of electricity through our brain, connecting certain neurons with each other. Neurons that fire together, wire together. The more you think or do something, the more that groove gets etched in your mind, and then it becomes easier and easier to do that thing. Now, this has a benefit and also a risk, a danger. Essentially, what it means is that the way we live every day becomes our character. So if we practice every day being frustrated, impatient, short-tempered and stressed, we are actively training our brain to get really good at being frustrated, short-tempered, stressed. However, if we practice every day being patient, kind, generous, and present, well, guess what? Our brain is going to get really familiar, really good at being patient, kind, generous, and present. So this is one way that mindfulness works. We engage in certain forms of mental exercise, mental training that help shift the functioning of our brain in the direction that we want to go in life. So how is it that we come to be here together today? Why am I speaking to you from California in the United States in 2021 about this practice that originated over 2,000 years ago in South Asia and ancient India? So I want to talk briefly about the history of mindfulness, where it comes from, and how it is that we're speaking here together today. So as I've mentioned, mindfulness has its origins in ancient Indian Buddhism. The word in Sanskrit for mindfulness is smrti. In the Pali language, which is the language that the Buddhist original texts were recorded in, the word is sati. And this word, smrti or sati, means literally to remember. So mindfulness practice is part of a much broader system of both mental training and spiritual cultivation in the Buddhist tradition. What is it that we are remembering? We are remembering to be present, remembering to be here, remembering what's important to us. In the 1960s and 1970s, people from North America, Western Europe, started traveling to Asia, to Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, some of the places that Buddhism traveled throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia, as I'm sure you're well aware, after India died out. After Buddhism died out in India, it had traveled to other places in South and Southeast Asia and continued to thrive and grow in different cultures, including Korea. Westerners came in the 60s and 70s to particularly Thailand, Burma, and Sri Lanka, and started practicing and learning different forms of Buddhism. Some Westerners also traveled to China, Japan, and started bringing Buddhism back to the West. In the 1970s, a man by the name of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who I have already mentioned, started learning and practicing these Buddhist meditation techniques. He was a doctor. He was working with chronic pain patients in the 1970s at University of Massachusetts. And he recognized that some of these practices could have profound benefits for patients struggling with chronic pain. And he conducted the first clinical trial of mindfulness for medical patients with chronic pain. This is in the 1970s, and it led to the founding of what we know today as mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. And this sparked a whole new wave of research on not only mindfulness, but neuroscience in the brain. What Jon Kabat-Zinn and many of his colleagues like Richard Davidson, Daniel Goleman, what they discovered is that at the core of Buddhism was this practice of mindfulness that could be shared widely without needing to believe anything or convert to a specific religion, that had profound benefits for all of us in the modern secular world. And so from the integration of mindfulness into the medical field, mindfulness, secular mindfulness, then began to move to other sectors of society, supported by the growing research on the effects on the brain of mindfulness practice. So the next kind of sector or field of modern society that mindfulness began to take root in was mental health, through practices like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. This was in the 1990s. From the mental health field in the 1990s, mindfulness continued to spread, particularly to education, the corporate and business sectors, and beyond to popular society. So this whole trend of mindfulness moving into secular society and shifting from the medical field to mental health to education and business has been supported by an increase in research on the effects of mindfulness, both qualitative and quantitative research. Since the 1970s, when there were perhaps only a handful of studies being done every year, until the present day, there has been an exponential growth in the research studies on mindfulness, to the point that today there's now over 1,000 studies in mindfulness published every year. So there is a vast and growing body of research supporting many of the benefits of mindfulness practice for adults, and more exploring the benefits of mindfulness for kids and children. So what are some of these benefits? Why has there been so much attention and research given to mindfulness? Mindfulness is a very powerful quality. It's an innate capacity that we all have. We can all pay attention. If you couldn't pay attention, you wouldn't be listening and understanding what I'm saying right now. We all have the capacity to pay attention and to be balanced, to have perspective. Now, of course, we're not connected to that capacity all of the time. Even though it's innate, it's not fully developed. So mindfulness practice gives us a method, a technique, to strengthen and enhance this natural capacity that we all have to be mindful, to pay attention in a curious and open way. So, what are the benefits of mindfulness? What does it do for us? I want to talk about 3 or 4 main benefits of mindfulness. And you can explore and see in your own experience as I talk, if you've been practicing mindfulness for some time. Have you experienced some of these benefits? Perhaps if you're brand new to mindfulness, as you listen, make a note of it, and over the coming months or years, consider, are these areas growing in your life? So, mindfulness improves our focus and attention, it increases resilience to stress, and it helps enhance our sense of well-being and understanding ourselves. How does it do this? So, improving focus and attention. Mindfulness practice, one aspect of it is the repeated training of coming back to a single experience. Oftentimes this will be the breath, but it could be other aspects of our experience, like noticing sounds or feeling sensations in the body. But one aspect of mindfulness training is coming back again and again to one particular thing. This is like doing weight training for our brain. It's strengthening our brain's capacity to stay connected to a chosen point of focus. The more we strengthen that capacity, the easier it becomes for our mind to stay on task, to choose something and stay focused on it. I remember being in college or even in high school and reading, and my mind wandering, being distracted, and reading the same paragraph or the same sentence over 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, because every time I would start reading it, by the time I got to the end of the sentence or the paragraph, my mind would have wandered. Are you familiar with this experience? So what mindfulness does is it helps us when we connect with an experience and want to pay attention to it, like reading. The mind stays there more readily rather than drifting and wandering away. This capacity to be focused, to keep our attention in one place, is one of the things that makes us effective in life. The capacity to be focused and have focused attention supports so many things in our life, from learning, being able to stay aware of something and learn from it, to realizing that we've had some kind of an insight, to following through on a project and really making sure that we take a task from beginning to middle all the way through to the end. So the implications of increasing our capacity for focus and attention in life are vast, given how important focus is. Mindfulness practice enhances not just this kind of one-pointed attention, but a whole range of different kinds of attention. The research in neuroscience points to many, many different kinds of attentions that we have, different ways of paying attention. Another very powerful form of attention that mindfulness strengthens that I want to talk briefly about is called metacognitive awareness. Metacognitive awareness is the ability to be aware of our own thinking. Meta meaning like one level up, cognitive thinking, awareness. So if I hold up my hand, what do you see? You probably see my hand, you see the 5 fingers. So usually in our life, we are focused on what's occurring, on the experience, the objects of our attention. Now, if I continue to hold up my hand and I direct your attention to the space between my fingers, the space around my hand, can you be aware of that? Of course, absolutely. Was it there before? Yes. Did you notice it before? Probably not. You were focused on the hand, not on the space around it. So one of the things that metacognitive awareness does is it allows us to shift our attention from what's in the foreground to what's in the background. This has vast implications for our life and our sense of well-being. We can become aware, for example, of an emotion like sadness or anger. Oftentimes when we feel a strong emotion, that emotion is the only thing we're aware of. It's like looking at the hand. Everything else moves to the background and disappears. What metacognitive awareness does is it allows us to take a step back to access that balanced part of mindfulness and recognize, oh, this is sadness or this is anger. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. It's totally natural. All people feel it sometimes, and it's not going to last forever. Eventually, this feeling, this emotion is going to change. It's going to pass. And so that capacity to step back, to widen our awareness, to shift the focus from what's happening to the broader context of our life, allows us to have more perspective, more space, more balance with our experience. Another analogy that I like to use to explain this benefit of mindfulness, this metacognitive awareness, this shift in perspective, is it's a little bit like watching a movie. So if we are watching a movie and it's a good movie that we like, we get very engrossed in the movie, right? All of our attention gets consumed by what we're watching, and we forget where we are, maybe even who's sitting next to us. So here in the United States right now, movie theaters are starting to open again. When you go to a movie and the lights go down and there's a big screen, it's like your life and the world disappear and we're just in the movie. So this is what happens in our lives from day to day. We get very engrossed in what's happening from moment to moment, inside ourselves or around us. Now, going back to the movie theater, if somebody coughs or you drop something on the ground, all of a sudden that spell of being lost in the movie gets broken and you remember, you realize, I'm in a movie theater, I'm sitting here, this person's next to me. So mindfulness helps us to shift our focus from just being absorbed in the movie of our life, the events, feelings, and reactions to what's occurring, to having a broader frame of reference, to being able to observe the process of our life and remember what's most important to us. Well, mindfulness practice really allows us to deepen these kinds of life skills. So this is one whole benefit of mindfulness, increasing our focus and strengthening different kinds of attention, like metacognitive awareness. Another key benefit of mindfulness that has particular implications for teaching and education is resilience to stress. The benefits of being focused in education are obvious, right? Talking about readiness for learning, being able to absorb information and retain it, all of that is quite clear, both for ourselves as instructors and for sharing those skills with students. When students learn mindfulness, they're able to focus better, to learn better. Resilience to stress allows us to bring our best self into the classroom. I'm not sure what it's like in South Korea, but here in the United States, teaching is challenging. Kids are under so much pressure today. Schools are often underfunded. Teachers are underappreciated. It's stressful. Oftentimes, teachers are managing classrooms that are fairly large. So having more resilience to stress, being able to bounce back, to not get so caught up in everything, allows us to really teach as best as we can and to be available for the children, the teens, and adolescents that we're working with. And being able to share those skills with students allows them as well to have more resilience. One of my favorite quotes about resilience is from the American author Annie Lamott, who said, "Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you." So one of the things that formal mindfulness training does is it allows us to step back and unplug from our life for a little bit. It's like giving your brain a rest, being able to rest our attention with something simple like the breath or sounds or the body, and take a break from the incessant busyness and activity of our own minds. How does mindfulness strengthen resilience? Well, we learn how the mind creates extra stress by observing how it functions in mindfulness practice. We see how our reactions and judgments create more turmoil inside. Not only that, every time our mind wanders, when we let go and bring it back to, say, the breath or whatever object of meditation and mindfulness we're practicing with, that in and of itself is a transferable skill, the ability to let go and begin again. How many times a day do we need to let go and begin again? How many times a day do we need to encourage and support our students to learn how to let go and begin again, how to start over? Mindfulness practice teaches us to do this in a very deep way, to be able to let go with joy even, with a sense of lightheartedness. It's part of the process of learning. It's part of being alive, having to begin again. It's important for me here in talking about resilience to stress to acknowledge that stress is not just an individual problem. There are structural reasons in our communities, in our society, in our schools that lead to stress. And so developing more skills personally, internally to handle stress is, of course, not enough. There are things that we all can do together to help change the systems that we live within to be able to have more supportive, human-centered institutions. So having more funding for our schools, having smaller classrooms, having more support for teachers, all of these are structural ways to address stress. And in the meantime, there are, of course, certain stressors in life and at work that we can't change, that are beyond our control. And those things perhaps are always going to be stressful. But what we can shift, what we can change, is how we relate to those stressors, the amount of reactivity we experience inside. Mindfulness helps us to understand and observe our own reactions to things so that, for example, getting stuck in traffic on your way to work doesn't need to be such a stressful event we're able to relax and let go and allow things to be when we recognize that it's out of our control. One of the best ways to do that is by taking short moments of mindfulness throughout your day. Again, I've never been to South Korea, so I don't know what the schools are like. But if they're anything like school and education here, where I'm familiar with in the United States, the day is very full. There's a lot on your plate. Working with kids is innately stressful. And if we don't have a way to recharge, to let go, to renew ourselves, we come to the end of the day and we can be exhausted, totally drained. So having short moments of mindfulness throughout the day, being able to close your eyes and just take a breath or two, can help us keep from accumulating so much stress throughout the day. Another very important way that mindfulness helps increase resilience to stress is by noticing the aspects of our experience that are nourishing. So far we've been talking about resilience to stress by focusing on that which is stressful and shifting our relationship to it, not getting as caught up in it, not reacting to it or resisting it. Another very important part of resilience is being able to notice and really take in that which is nourishing and good in our life and in our day. So mindfulness helps us to begin again. Mindfulness helps us to not have such a strong reaction to stress. It also allows us to notice the things that are going well, the things that are beautiful, the things that we enjoy. This scroll behind me was a gift to me from my wife's family. Her father is from China and was an art collector. And this particular scroll is about 100 years old. It was painted in the early 1920s. And if I'm not mindful, I can forget to really see it and take in its beauty. When I'm present and mindful, I look at the scroll and something relaxes inside. It reminds me of my connection with my wife's family, of my appreciation for Asian culture and art. And the beauty of the image relaxes me. So, noticing ordinary experiences of pleasure, enjoyment, happiness, or connection throughout our day improves our resilience. When we're mindful, we're more present, and we don't take our life as for granted. We notice the beauty of the sky, the smell of the air, the gift of being able to drink a glass of water. And we can really be present for those experiences. My friend and colleague Rick Hansen, who is a mindfulness teacher, author, and neuroscientist, he talks about a practice of taking in the good for 20 seconds. So anytime you notice something in your experience that's nourishing, that's enjoyable and pleasant, see if you can linger there for just 20 seconds and allow it to really fulfill you. Let it saturate or really soak into your whole mind and body. In other words, receive the benefit of that pleasant experience. This will in time improve and enhance your resilience. So mindfulness is doing two things there. One, it's helping us to notice the beauty, the goodness in our life. If we're not mindful, we're just on automatic, kind of going through things, and we miss those experiences that could otherwise be nourishing. So it helps us to notice them. And then as we notice it, if we're able to just linger there for 20 seconds, being fully present, mindfulness helps us to absorb and receive the goodness of that experience. So we've talked about a few benefits of mindfulness so far: improving our focus and attention, strengthening resilience to stress by being able to let go and begin again, by being aware of our reactivity and not getting as caught in it, and also by taking in the good, by noticing these healthy aspects of our experience. One more benefit of mindfulness that I want to point to and highlight today is our capacity for self-regulation and impulse control. This is particularly important for our work with kids and students and adolescents. There's a famous quote attributed to the author Viktor Frankl, who said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom." In other words, when we are on automatic, when we're not present, we react. Our habits dictate how we relate to life. When we are mindful and present, we have the choice. It gives us space to make a different choice, to recognize what's happening and to respond rather than react, to have a more conscious and clear way of engaging. So when I was teaching mindfulness to elementary school students here in Oakland, California, outside of San Francisco, every day when I would come into the classroom, and I would teach several different classes in one school, I would ask all of the kids, I would say, "Who remembered to use your mindfulness since I saw you last?" which was usually about 2 or 3 days ago. And kids would raise their hand and say, "Oh, I did mindfulness here, I did mindfulness there." So one day this little boy raises his hand and said, me. So I said, "When did you remember to use mindfulness?" He said, "Well, I got mad at my sister and I wanted to kick her, and then I remembered my mindfulness and I took a mindful breath and I didn't kick my sister." Now, hopefully most of us as adults are not walking around in our lives kicking other people. And yet, we may be reacting to others. Oftentimes we kick each other with our words. We say something short or sharp or a little bit harsh to somebody. So mindfulness gives us that pause to recognize that we're feeling angry or reacting. Take a breath, feel the reaction, and make a different choice. This is huge for children, teaching them the skills to be aware of how they feel and to be able to make a different choice. One of the things that mindfulness does for us, particularly in education and working with children, is when we are able to be aware of our own reactions, our nervous system is more regulated. We know today that the human organism's nervous system continues to develop into the early 20s. Adolescence, in terms of brain development, isn't complete until about 23 or 24. It differs by gender a little bit. So if you're working with children, teens, or adolescents, their nervous system can't regulate on its own. Their nervous system is still maturing and growing. And one of the ways it does that is by being in relationship with adult nervous systems. The more grounded and regulated your nervous system is, the more you're able to offer to the kids and the children and the adolescents that you work with. One of our primary offerings or interventions with kids is simply our own state of being. Again, if we're stressed out, anxious, dysregulated, the classroom will reflect that and the kids will feel it in their own bodies. The more we're able to be grounded, collected, clear, and well-regulated, children will pick up on that. Their nervous system will feel that. This is called co-regulation. It's connected to the way that our neurobiology affects one another. So mindfulness helps us to stay more grounded and regulated so that we can really have an impact on the kids we're teaching on a very kind of direct interpersonal level through the way we're showing up. There's one more very important benefit of mindfulness I want to share, and we touched on it a little bit, which is that it helps us to be more present for our life. Sometimes we're so busy, focused on the future and what we need to get done and what's happening later, that we miss what's happening in front of us. And one of the greatest gifts we can give to the children and the teens and the adolescents that we work with is our attention. Really seeing the person in front of us can have a huge impact on their life. Just one relationship with an adult who really sees a child, who values them, who believes in them, can affect the trajectory of the whole person's life. Mindfulness helps us to be fully present for ourselves, to not miss our own life, always working and thinking about the future, being lost in the past. And it allows us to bring the gift of our wholehearted presence to the kids, to the adolescents that we work with. So mindfulness can do all of this. It's a tall order, and yet I've seen it in my own life. The research bears it out. There are different ways that we can integrate mindfulness into our work and our education. Mindfulness has an effect in the classroom, first and foremost, in terms of how you show up. Remember, you yourself are an intervention. Your very presence has an impact on the children that you work with. So the more present and grounded you are, the more you have to offer. So even if you're not teaching or sharing mindfulness with kids, if you're practicing it yourself, if you're learning how to be more aware and balanced and resilient, more regulated, your own mindfulness practice is having an indirect benefit on the children and the teaching. It's changing the whole atmosphere of your classroom. So integrating mindfulness into your own day and practicing mindfulness is one very important way to bring mindfulness into your work. How do we do this? Of course, having some kind of daily mindfulness practice is recommended. So whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes or longer, taking time at the beginning or the end of the day, whenever you can find the time, to practice mindfulness formally. Using the breath, using the body. There are many practices that are being offered here in the conference for you to explore and learn and see which one of those really speaks to you. Which ones do you enjoy? Which ones work for you? Whichever that is, practice it every day for a little bit. This is one way of integrating mindfulness into your work and your life. Another is to cultivate informal mindful moments during the day. I spoke about this a little bit earlier. So make a little ritual for yourself of pausing and taking a breath. Say, every time you enter your classroom, or when you open your laptop, when you look at your device, when the phone rings. There are all these things we do every single day that can become reminders, like a mindfulness bell. It reminds us to come back to being present. You might feel your body in one of those pauses. Periodically throughout the day, take 5 seconds, 10 seconds to just look around, to breathe, to remember that you're alive, to notice something pleasant and take it in. You can create certain routines so that this becomes integrated into your day, maybe before or after sending an email, if you're on the phone and you're waiting on hold. Taking very short breaks, maybe between classes or when you hand out an assignment. Find the things in your day that help you remember and make it a routine where every time you do that, you take a little break. A wonderful time to do this is before eating. We all eat several times a day. It's a natural time to just pause, take a breath. We can cultivate gratitude, appreciate that we have food to eat. Of course, you can also share mindfulness practice with your students. This takes some training. It's important to understand and really know how to practice mindfulness properly yourself before sharing it with kids. You wouldn't say, try to teach calculus or art history, having never studied it yourself, right? You would want to learn the material that you're going to be teaching really well and understand it before you share it. So there are many programs and resources for sharing and teaching mindfulness with kids. And you can do this every day in very simple ways, short ways with your kids. Just being able to take a few mindful breaths, for example, before a test can improve learning readiness and focus, can help kids relax and do better on the test. There are many ways like this to offer mindfulness to your students. The last thing I want to share with you a little bit today is, how do we know if our mindfulness practice is working? I've talked about all of these different benefits to mindfulness. Remember that analogy I gave in the beginning of walking through the meadow 100 times, 1,000 times. It takes time to see the benefits of mindfulness. If you just walk through the meadow 5 times, you're not going to have a really well-traveled path yet. Mindfulness takes time to really integrate into our life. The benefits of mindfulness don't always show up in the places we think they will. It often shows up slowly over time in unexpected moments where something happens and we don't react, or we react differently than we would have before, and then all of a sudden we realize, oh wow, look at that, that's different. Also, when we are experiencing a reaction, if we are feeling stressed or angry or frustrated, and say we remember to use mindfulness, we close our eyes, we take a few mindful breaths, that doesn't mean that the uncomfortable feeling will magically disappear. That's not how mindfulness works. What mindfulness will do is it can help you have more perspective on that feeling. So the feeling will still be present, but now it's not the only thing. There's maybe a little bit more space with the feeling, a little bit more perspective. So one of the ways that mindfulness works is not to make uncomfortable or unpleasant things go away. That's just part of life. But it means that when we encounter stressful, difficult, or uncomfortable things, we don't lose our ground, we don't lose our center. We can take some mindful breaths, we can come back to feeling our body, and have another reference point, so that what we're experiencing is no longer the only reference point. It's no longer taking up our whole awareness. It's occupying a little bit of a smaller space, and we have access to a little bit more perspective. I think I want to end by just really offering my encouragement. These skills that I've been talking about are so powerful, so transformative. They really have the potential to heal our own hearts, to bring more meaning and balance into our lives, and to help us really contribute the best we have to offer to the kids and children we're working with, and really to our community and our families. So I want to offer my wholehearted encouragement, if you don't already practice mindfulness, to explore, experiment with it. There's nothing you have to believe here. In fact, don't believe anything I said. Check it out for yourself. Read, learn, and most importantly, practice. The benefits will only come by practicing. You can't learn to swim by reading a book. You have to get in the water. You won't see the benefits of mindfulness by listening to this lecture or reading a book about mindfulness. You actually have to practice it. And it's entirely doable. Every one of us has this capacity and can strengthen it. So it's been a pleasure to spend this time together. I wish each of you well in your life, and I thank you for the work that you're doing with kids and children in our world. It's, I think, one of the most important things we can do. So please enjoy the rest of the conference. It's a real honor to be here and contribute to the Mindfulness Conference in South Korea. And maybe we'll see each other down the line at another event. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks so much.